I really hadn't planned for this series to be just a series of videos of me talking about a poem and then the general interpretation of the poem, but then sort of a dark, weird, twisted interpretation of that same poem. But that's what 30 Must Read Poems has become at this point, until, of course, we get to Emily Dickinson, because with Emily Dickinson, you just start at the weird, twisted, dark interpretation. But today's poem, I've noticed something I think that I have never noticed before. So this poem gets weirder, darker, and twisteder. Twisteder. Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we are here for another poetry discussion, which will appear in 3 separate playlists here on the channel. Number 1 being the poetry discussion playlist, approaching 700 videos strong. Number 2 being the Emily Dickinson playlist, a playlist of videos exclusively about the greatest poet of all time, Emily Dickinson. And number 3 will be 30 must-read poems. The videos in the 30 must-read poems series have 3 separate parts to them. We'll open up with an intro, but then we'll get into a quick biography of the writer. We will get into the types of poetry that for which that writer is known, and then we will do an analysis of the poem in question. So, who was Emily Dickinson? Emily Elizabeth Dickinson, the reclusive and enigmatic poet, was born December 10th, 1830, in Amherst, Massachusetts. For reference, this was the same year that the Church of Latter-day Saints was born and King George IV died. Ironically, in contrast with Emily's misanthropic propensities, her family was distinguished in the community. Notably, her father Edward was a lawyer and a trustee at Amherst College, a college her grandfather, Samuel, had a hand in founding. But if her family name and her father loomed large in the community, Edward was inescapable in her life. Of her father, Emily said, "His heart was pure and terrible, and I think no other like it exists." Still, she respected him, even if her literary and intellectual proclivities were pursued in rebellion. If her father ran hot, it seems it was something she could understand, if not admire. Her relationship with her mother was colder. Emily Norcross Dickinson was said to be melancholic, and might today be described as depressive. Of her mother, Emily said, "She was an awful mother, but I liked her better than none." Far from a 5-star review, but we can recognize the signatures of both temperatures in her poetry. At 17 years old, Emily began attending Mary Lyons Mount Holyoke Female Seminary. She would attend the seminary all the way until May of the next year. The reasons for her leaving depend on who is relaying them. Whatever the reasons, like many geniuses, she did not finish her foray into post-secondary education. Shortly thereafter, Dickinson's relationship with Susan Gilbert would blossom and be further solidified in 1853 when Gilbert was engaged to Austin Dickinson, Emily's brother. Susan would then become Susan Gilbert Dickinson in 1856. During this same decade, Emily would embark on an introspective odyssey that would transform American letters and poetry altogether. The years from 1858 to 1865 are referred to as the writing years by Dickinson scholars. During this period, she wrote hundreds of poems, and by the end of this period, she had written over 1,100 of her 1,789 known poems. but she would end this period in her cousin's care after receiving treatment for what is now believed to have been iritis, an inflammation of the muscles in her eyes. If the humanitarian burden of writing 1,000 of the greatest poems to ever exist was not toilsome enough to cause her complete withdrawal, loss would be. Part of her instructions, in order that she would keep her eyesight, was that she had to stop reading. Emily Dickinson also struggled mightily to deal with death, and losing people who were important to her devastated her more each time it happened. During this period, she had remarked that before she could recover from one loss, she had lost someone else. And with hundreds of the greatest poems to ever be written still inside her mind, Emily Dickinson became the woman in white, dressing completely in white, never leaving her family's property, and even preferring to speak to people through the closed door to her bedroom. Emily Dickinson would publish only 10 poems during her lifetime. All of them were published without attribution. On May 15th, 1886, Emily Dickinson died after more than 2 years of battling what was known as Bright's disease, a type of kidney disease. Her final words were, "I must go in. The fog is rising." Emily Dickinson is often studied through the lenses of lyrical poetry and romantic poetry. Lyric poetry refers to a short poem, often with song-like qualities, that expresses the speaker's personal emotions and feelings. Historically intended to be sung and accompany musical instrumentation, lyric now describes a broad category of non-narrative poetry, including elegies, odes, and sonnets. Romantic poetry is a poetic movement of the late 18th and early 19th centuries that turned toward nature and the interior world of feeling in opposition to the mannered formalism and disciplined scientific inquiry of the Enlightenment era that preceded it. English poets such as William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, John Keats, Percy Bysshe Shelley, William Blake, and Lord Byron produced work that expressed spontaneous feelings, found parallels to their own emotional lives in the natural world, and celebrated creativity rather than logic. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too, for his civility. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun. Or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill, for only gossamer my gown, my tippet only tulle. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then, 'tis centuries, and yet feel shorter than the day I first surmised the horses' heads, or toward eternity. Now, a lot of the poems that we have done for this series so far, you have a reading and there's sort of a general interpretation, and then what we've done in this series largely has been to find a dark and weird sort of twisted interpretation to the poem. But with Emily Dickinson, that's all right up front. The weird, dark, twisted interpretation kind of Well, it's the only one. But I think that there is a darker route to take this. I think that there is. So I've probably read this poem 200 times. Easily 200 times. I've probably made 5 videos on this poem over the course of this channel. I believe I noticed something for the first time with this reading. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. I'm going to read it one more time. Something weird happens in that stanza, but you don't see it. You do not see it in the poem. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. Did you catch it? How do we transition between these two lines? Death stopped for me, and I found myself in the carriage. We'll come back to this, but just think about that mechanism. Nowhere in the first couplet, because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me, is it presumed that whoever does the stopping will do the picking up. Nowhere is it presumed that there will be a picking up. This sort of transition makes it sound as if our speaker, who I will refer to as she, as if she were calling an Uber. Clearly not, right? This is a little bit before Uber's time. But this idea that because death had stopped, I find myself in the carriage. There's something going on there. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility. We were just kind of calmly going about our way, me and death, don't you know? We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. Childhood. We're looking at our speaker's past. We passed the fields of gazing grain. This is the work portion of life. The summer and the fall of life. This is the spring of life. This is the summer and the fall of life with gazing grain. And then we have the winter. We passed the setting sun, the nighttime, the darkness. This is death. Or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill, for only gossamer my gown, my tippet only tulle. So the sun went past us. The dews drew quivering and chill in the darkness. We're in the dark without the sun, but death is here. For only gossamer my gown. Gossamer is a thin type of material, largely referred to as a thin type of fabric. You could refer to a spider web as gossamer. That's sort of one of the maybe cliche ways to which spider webs are referred in sort of dated texts. Instead of just calling them a spider web, they'll call it gossamer. So, gossamer, my gown. My tippet is like a headwear, I think. So, my tippet only tulle. Tulle is a type of netting. So, this is building the visual of someone who has been buried, someone who is interred, someone who is being put into the ground. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Is this the casket being lowered? Since then 'tis centuries, and yet feel shorter than the day I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity. So obviously this is death has come. Our speaker has died, and in the afterlife, everything goes so fast. There is no time to get used to it. But let's go back up here. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. Does that, or does that not, sound an awful lot like our speaker was abducted? Now, the way that I normally read this poem is that our speaker is so busy with life because I could not stop for death. It was because I could not stop for death. I was so busy that I could not stop for death. I was so busy, I got to pay the taxes, I got to mow the lawn, I got 3 loads of laundry I got to do those dishes, I got to dry the dishes, I got to put the dishes away. All of these things. Because I could not stop for death, I was just work-a-body, right? Well, death made the time for me. The way that I have always interpreted this poem is as if our speaker, just kind of going with the flow, finds herself dead. Ooh, it doesn't read like it there, though, does it? Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. And then I found myself in his carriage. So, if this is, however, an abduction scene, if we're talking about our speaker here being abducted by death, that next stanza hits very differently. So if you're going with the reading that this is someone who has work-a-bodied themselves into not realizing they're dying, that next stanza is a calm, right? We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too. These are the things that, if we're assuming that she had work-a-bodied herself to death, these are the things that she had clung to for his civility. But if we are taking this reading as death has abducted our speaker, we slowly drove, he knew no haste. Well, that's kind of scary, isn't it? If he's abducted you, that means he knows he's not going to get caught. There's no chance. Otherwise, he'd be driving that getaway car. And I had put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility. Under that first reading, if she had work-a-bodied herself to death, that second stanza is a calm, perhaps a slow realization. If, however, our speaker here is abducted by death, by the time we get just to that second stanza, that feels as acceptance, doesn't it? That feels like, well, if I'm being abducted, it can't be any worse than my life. Doesn't it feel that way? Now, I think that largely the rest of the poem is a bit less affected than that second stanza, if we are assuming that our speaker was abducted. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun. This stanza, if our speaker is abducted as opposed to work-a-bodied herself to death, then I think what we could be assuming here is that our speaker is looking for landmarks, right? I am not in control of where we're going. I need to find some landmarks. Or rather, he passed us, the dews drew quivering and chill, for only gossamer my gown, my tippet only tulle. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. Um, the roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then to centuries, and yet feel shorter than the day I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity. I think the rest of the poem is largely unaffected whether or not we assume that this is a an abduction or someone just working themselves to death. But here is perhaps the intent of the poem, perhaps not. We're going to go back to that opening stanza. I know I've read it 30 times now in this video, but because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. At the beginning of this poem, our speaker is alive. By the end of the poem, our speaker's not just dead. Our speaker's been dead for a millennia. We don't see the death. We don't feel the death. We don't see the transition or feel it either. It is just sort of realized. Whether our speaker is rudely abducted or simply figures it out, has worked herself to death. She's alive at the beginning of this poem. You're alive right now. How long is it before you wake up realizing that your life has been spent? Shouldn't you then live present in the moment the way that our speaker does not? Whether our speaker was abducted at the beginning and was not present in that abduction, just kind of, oh, well, okay, or had worked herself to death, either way, she is not present in the moment. Either way, she has found herself years later, centuries later, dead, gone. Never realized that it happened. Didn't see it taking place. Isn't that a terrifying perspective? Isn't that something that we should all hope does not happen to us? And yet, I'm willing to bet, really willing to bet, some portion of your life, this has happened. Some part of what it is to be you has been forgotten in the past couple years, has been left behind. Isn't that the same thing that's happening here? Our speaker has woken up and realized that she left her entire life behind. But that's just a metaphor. Isn't it that in our lives we bit and piece these things dropping by the wayside? Isn't it that in our real lives we don't just wake up dead, but we wake up, 40, and we realize our 30s, I don't even remember them. We had the same job at the same place, and maybe we worked every Saturday of our 30s. Did we get anything for it? Maybe not, probably not. But here we are. Maybe you're turning 30 and you don't really remember a whole lot after, say, 18 when you got out of high school or 22 when you got out of college. It just seems like one great, big topsy-turvy. Day after day after day after day doing the same thing. Never working on that thing you meant to work on. Never talking to that person you had meant to call. Never starting conversation with someone you should have approached. Maybe there could have been a lifelong friend there. Maybe there could have been your partner there. but you didn't do it. And now, so long has passed, you can't even remember their name. You knew it at one point. You creeped around and figured it out somehow. But now you can't remember. Really can't remember their face either. This is how death happens. Suddenly, then all at once, right? Is that the lesson underneath this poem? Be where you are. Whether death wants to stop or not, make that son of a bitch catch you. That's all I have for this poetry discussion. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting a like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature fans. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, consider hitting the subscribe button to stick around for more. And as always, I hope to have you back for the next one.